I never thought a slip of paper from a gas station on Willow Creek Road could change my life. But on the first Sunday of April, it did, and in a way I could never have imagined. I'm Mary Collins. I'm 62 years old, a widow of nearly a decade, and last week, I became a multi-millionaire. I didn't tell a soul. Not my only son, not my daughter-in-law, not even my oldest friend. If you're hearing this right now, stop for a second and tell me, what would you do if you won millions overnight? Would you scream it from the rooftops, or would you lock it away as your most dangerous secret? Drop your answer in the comments below, hit that subscribe button, and share this with someone who's ever wondered who would be there for them if they lost everything. Because that's exactly the question I decided to answer for myself. Until that Sunday, my life had been predictable in its loneliness. I live alone in a small 2-bedroom cottage on the edge of Pine Hollow, Oregon, where the winters are long and the neighbors keep to themselves. I fill my days with gardening, volunteering at the local library, and twice-weekly lunches at Miller's Diner with my friend Ruth. My son, Andrew, is 37 and lives about an hour away in a gated suburban neighborhood with his wife, Megan. He works in corporate finance. She's an interior designer with an Instagram following big enough to attract local brand deals. They drive a glossy black SUV and post photos from ski trips in Aspen and wine tastings in Napa. I love them, but the truth is, I've felt the slow drift between us for years. Since my husband, Daniel, passed away from a heart attack 9 years ago, Andrew has been different. Less patient. Less interested in stopping by unless it's a holiday. And Megan, well, Megan is polite, but she's never made an effort to get close. There's always been a faint air of judgment when she looks at my modest home or my old Ford sedan. Money has always been a quiet tension between us. I've helped them in the past, paid off one of Andrew's credit cards when he was newly married, covered part of a down payment for their first condo, even babysat their dog during their honeymoon to Italy. But when I had a leaking roof 3 years ago, they told me they weren't in a position to help. That Sunday, I stopped at Murphy's Gas and Mart for milk and bread. On impulse, I bought 2 Powerball tickets. I've done it every few weeks for years, not because I expect to win, but because for a few days, I like having the fantasy. That night, sitting at my kitchen table with a mug of chamomile tea, I checked the numbers on my phone. The first number matched. I smiled. The second matched too. By the time I got to the 6th number, my heart was pounding so hard I had to set the phone down. I turned on the TV, rewound the live drawing, and watched each number roll out exactly as I'd chosen them. The ticket was worth $61.4 million. After taxes, it would be just over $35 million. I sat there in my dim kitchen, the old wall clock ticking louder than I'd ever noticed before, and I laughed. Not because I was happy, not exactly, but because it felt unreal. Me. Mary Collins, who'd been counting coupons last week to afford a new water heater, now worth more than I could spend in 3 lifetimes. But then, the laughter faded. My mind jumped straight to Andrew and Megan. I could already hear the phone calls, the just thought we'd stop by visits, the subtle and not so subtle requests. I could picture the shift in their eyes, from seeing me as mom to seeing me as a vault. And I knew I couldn't tell them. Not yet. Maybe not ever. That night, I couldn't sleep. Instead, I read story after story about lottery winners whose lives had fallen apart. Families suing each other. Marriages crumbling. Lifelong friends turning into strangers over borrowed money. By dawn, I had made my decision. I would claim the money, but I would tell no one. I'd keep living my life as if nothing had changed. And then, when I was ready, I'd test Andrew and Megan. I'd create a situation that would show me exactly who they were when there was nothing in it for them. It wouldn't be about revenge. It would be about clarity. The next morning, I drove into the city to meet with a lawyer named Thomas Bell, whose office smelled faintly of leather and old books. He was in his 50s, with sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and the kind of handshake that makes you feel both reassured and warned. I want to claim a lottery prize, I told him, sliding the ticket across his desk, but I don't want my name out there. And I don't want my family to know. He didn't even blink. We can set up a blind trust. Your name won't be public, and the money can be managed so you'll never have to worry about taxes or theft. For the next 2 hours, we talked about investments, charitable trusts, and how to move large sums quietly. By the time I left, the wheels were already in motion. My future was secure. But my plan wasn't about the money, it was about the truth. 2 weeks later, with my accounts set and my assets hidden, I picked up the phone. I would call Andrew first. I'd tell him I'd lost the small inheritance Daniel left me, that my part-time job at the library had been cut, and that I needed $4,000 to cover property taxes and a medical bill. Not an impossible sum for someone in his income bracket, but significant enough to show me where his loyalty lay. As I stared at my phone, my thumb hovering over his name, I felt my pulse in my ears. I had no idea that the next 7 days would rip away every last illusion I had about my only son, and that the person who would end up saving me would be the one I least expected. I pressed Andrew's name and waited. The ring seemed longer than it was. "Hey," he said, distracted. "Everything okay?" I told him the library had cut my hours. The little savings Daniel left me was gone, spent on a new water heater and some recent medical tests. I said I was short on my property taxes and a bill. $4,000 would cover it. I promised I'd pay it back within 6 months. Silence stretched just long enough for me to picture him weighing his words. "That's a lot," he said finally. "We just had some big expenses. The SUV needed all 4 tires, and Megan's doing a spring refresh for the house. We're in a tight cycle." "I understand," I said. "I wouldn't ask if there were another way." "Let me talk to Megan," he said. "We might be able to help a little. Maybe not the whole amount." "When do you need it?" "By Friday," I replied. He promised to call that night. But when the hours dragged past dinner, then past 10, I knew I wouldn't hear from him. At midnight, my phone buzzed. A text from Andrew: "We can do $500 this week, maybe more next month. Have you thought about renting your spare room?" I stared at the screen, remembering the times I'd helped him without question, paying off his credit card debt, helping with the down payment for his first home, never asking for a repayment plan. The next afternoon, Megan called. Her voice was sweet but brisk, like a receptionist moving to her next call. "We want to help, but we've got a lot going on. That bathroom renovation, costs keep popping up. What we can do now is $500. We'll reevaluate next month." I said the deadline for the county taxes and the hospital deposit was this week. She paused. "You could move in with us for a bit. Once the guest bath's done, we'd have plenty of space. You wouldn't need to worry about the house or taxes. We could even do content together. People love multi-generational living." The image flashed in my mind, me in one of her Instagram reels, holding a mug under soft lighting, playing the wholesome mother-in-law. I declined politely. That night, $500 landed in my account with a message: "We're proud of you for asking for help." It's not easy. Proud. The word sat in my stomach like a stone. The next morning, I called Andrew before his workday began. I thanked him for the $500 but told him plainly, $4,000 was the amount I needed by Friday. Less than that wouldn't stop the county from seizing my home or the hospital from delaying my scan. He was quiet, then careful. "Mom, we can't jeopardize our own obligations. Maybe you could sell your wedding ring. Or ask the church, sometimes they do collections." The suggestion to sell my ring, Daniel's ring, landed cold. "I'll figure it out," I said, ending the call. Afterward, I walked slow laps in the yard. The tulips were pushing up, stubborn and bright against the damp soil. The sky was pale blue, unbothered. The answer was clear. At noon, I parked behind the bakery downtown but didn't go in. Instead, I called Evelyn, Daniel's sister. We'd never been close, but she'd never been unkind. "Mary," she said warmly. "It's been a while." I told her about the tax bill, the hospital deposit, the Friday deadline. She listened without interrupting. "Come by my place," she said. "I've got something for you." No questions. On the way, my phone buzzed again. "Andrew, glad you're getting it sorted. Keep us posted." I set the phone face down on the passenger seat. The road ahead was straight and clean, and in 3 days, would know exactly who belonged in my life when I had nothing to give but myself. Evelyn's small blue house sat at the far end of Maple Street, its porch sagging slightly but lined with pots of yellow daffodils that brightened the gray afternoon. She opened the door before I even reached the steps, pulling me into a hug that smelled faintly of lavender and coffee. "You look tired," she said, ushering me in. "Sit down, I'll make tea." Her living room was tidy but worn, with mismatched furniture and a crocheted blanket draped over the sofa. She set 2 mugs on the coffee table and disappeared into the kitchen. When she returned, she placed a plain white envelope in front of me. "It's a little over $2,000, she said. "I can't give more without dipping into my emergency fund, but I want you to have it." My throat tightened. "Evelyn, I can't." "You can," she interrupted. "Family helps family. And I know you'd do the same for me." The words hit hard because they were true. She had no reason to give me this, no history of borrowing from me, no ledger to balance. She was offering it because she wanted to. I accepted the envelope, my fingers trembling. We sipped our tea, talking about nothing and everything, her arthritis, my garden, the weather turning. She never asked for details about my situation beyond what I'd told her on the phone. No probing questions, no subtle judgment. When I left, the envelope felt heavier than it should have. It wasn't the money, it was what it meant. I had reached out to Andrew, my only child, and he had offered a fraction of what I needed, dressed in the language of busyness and pride. Evelyn, who lived on a fixed income, had offered half the amount without hesitation. Driving home, I thought about my next move. The test wasn't over. I had planned to approach more than just Andrew and Megan. I wanted to see how others in my circle would respond, not because I needed the help, but because I needed to know who saw me as more than a resource. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a notepad, listing names. Ruth was at the top. My oldest friend, the one who dropped soup on my porch without being asked. I hesitated, wondering if it was even fair to test her. But fairness wasn't the point, it was truth. I called her the next morning. She answered on the first ring. "Mary, you sound rough. You sick?" I told her the same story, cut hours, gone savings, an urgent bill and tax deadline. $4,000 needed by Friday. I kept my voice calm, not pleading. "Come by after lunch," she said immediately. "We'll talk." When I arrived, she had a plate of sandwiches on the table. She poured coffee and listened without interrupting, just like Evelyn. Then she nodded, reached into her purse, and pulled out her checkbook. "I can do 1,000 right now," she said. "I'll see if my brother can help cover the rest. He still owes you from that time you lent him money for his truck." I hadn't expected that. I remembered that loan, one I'd almost forgotten, and felt a strange warmth at the fact that she hadn't. I told her I'd let her know if I needed to take her up on the offer. She didn't press, didn't ask for a repayment timeline, didn't make me feel small. That night, I compared the 3 responses, Andrew and Megan's 500, Evelyn's 2,000, Ruth's instant offer of 1,000 plus help finding the rest. The pattern was already clear, and it hurt in ways I hadn't braced for. On Thursday morning, 2 days before my deadline, I got a call from Andrew. "So," he said, "Megan and I were talking. We feel like you might be leaning on us more than you should. We can't be the only ones you ask." I bit back the truth, that they were the first ones I asked, and their answer had been as small as it was performative. "I'm not leaning," I said. "I'm just giving you the chance to be there." There was a pause. "We love you, Mom," he said finally, "but we have to protect our own stability." I thanked him and ended the call. The rest of the day passed in a quiet haze. I watered the tulips, folded laundry, and baked banana bread for the first time in months. The act of mixing flour and sugar felt grounding. The smell filled the kitchen, warm and familiar, like something from before all this. That evening, Evelyn called to check in. "Any luck?" she asked. "More than I expected," I told her. "Not from where I thought it would come." She laughed softly. "That's how it goes. People will surprise you, but not always in the way you hope." After we hung up, I sat on the couch with the envelope from her and the small cash Ruth had pressed into my hand, just in case. Between them, I had more than enough to cover my fictional bill. But the real currency I'd gained was knowledge, sharp, unvarnished knowledge of who I could count on. Friday morning, I brewed coffee and stood at the kitchen window. The sun was just starting to rise, casting long shadows across the yard. My phone buzzed with a text from Megan. "Hope you found the rest of the money. We're slammed today, but we'll call this weekend." No offer to check in, no question about how I was doing, just a polite nudge away from their doorstep. I turned away from the window and looked around my small, worn kitchen. Every surface was familiar, every flaw mine. I thought about how easily it could all be gone if I'd truly been in trouble and had counted on Andrew's help. The test was nearly complete. One more step, and I'd have my answer carved in stone. By Friday afternoon, the test had already painted its picture in bold strokes. But part of me still wanted to give Andrew one last opportunity to surprise me, to step forward without being pushed. I spent the morning paying bills online, sipping coffee at the kitchen table. The $2,000 from Evelyn and $1,000 from Ruth sat untouched in my desk drawer, along with the crisp $500 Andrew had sent. I didn't need a cent of it for the reasons I'd given. The real debt I was tallying wasn't in dollars, it was in loyalty. Around noon, my phone buzzed. It was Andrew, this time with a video call request. My thumb hovered before I accepted. His face appeared, framed by the sleek lines of his home office, bookshelf staged with designer pieces, a carefully placed plant in the corner. "Hey, Mom," he said. "We just wanted to check in." Megan stepped into frame, smiling like she'd rehearsed it. "We hope you're doing okay." "I'm fine," I said evenly. "Still trying to pull together what I need." They exchanged a glance so quick I almost missed it. Andrew leaned forward. "So, we've been thinking. We know this is stressful, and we want to help in a more sustainable way. What if you sold the house? You could downsize, free up cash, move closer to us. We could help you find something modern, low maintenance." Megan nodded eagerly. "It would be such a fresh start for you, Mary. And you'd be near us, so if anything came up, medical, repairs, we could be right there." I knew what they were offering sounded reasonable to anyone outside this conversation. But I also knew it wasn't about me. It was about control. About having me where they could manage my needs on their schedule, in a package that fit their life's aesthetic. "I like my house," I said simply. "I've been here a long time." Andrew's jaw tightened just enough to notice. "Well, think about it. It just seems practical." We ended the call with polite smiles, but as soon as the screen went black, I felt my shoulders tense. The longer this went on, the clearer it became. They weren't hearing me, they were assessing me, like a problem to be solved in the least inconvenient way. That evening, Ruth dropped by unannounced with a loaf of crusty bread and a bottle of wine. She didn't ask for updates, didn't press for details. We sat on my porch, sipping wine while the sun set behind the trees, and for a couple of hours, I didn't think about Andrew or Megan at all. The next morning, I decided it was time to close the loop. I texted Andrew, "I've managed to cover the bills. Thanks for what you were able to send." Less than a minute later, 3 dots appeared. "Glad to hear it. Megan and I were talking, maybe now we can focus on planning that downsizing move." I didn't reply. Instead, I picked up the envelope from Evelyn and Ruth's contributions and held it in my hands. I thought about the difference between help offered with strings and help offered without question. By Sunday, I knew I couldn't let this pass without a real conversation. If I didn't address it now, the pattern would calcify. So I invited Andrew and Megan over for dinner the following Friday. I made it sound casual, just a home-cooked meal, a chance to catch up. When Friday came, I roasted a chicken, set the table with my good dishes, and lit candles. It wasn't about making them comfortable, it was about making the space feel intentional, like a stage for the words I needed to say. They arrived a little late, smelling faintly of expensive perfume and cologne. Megan complimented the table setting. Andrew glanced around and said, "Looks nice in here," as if the house had dressed up for them. We ate in polite conversation, whether Megan's latest design project, Andrew's insane week at work. I waited until the plates were cleared before I leaned forward, resting my hands on the table. "I want to talk about something," I began. "The other week, I asked for help. I told you what I needed and when I needed it." Andrew shifted in his chair. Megan looked at him before speaking. "And we helped how we could. We told you." I held up a hand. "Let me finish. You sent me $500. Evelyn, who lives on a fixed income, gave me $2,000. Ruth offered $1,000 without hesitation and even said she'd help me find the rest. Do you understand the difference?" Andrew's brows drew together. "Mom, we can't compare our situation to." "Yes, we can," I cut in. "Because it's not about numbers. It's about how you show up for someone you claim to care about." I wasn't asking for a luxury. I said I needed it to keep my house and pay a medical bill. "And your answer was, what? A partial payment and a suggestion to sell my home?" Megan's smile was gone. "That's not fair. We have obligations." "We all do," I said. "Evelyn does. Ruth does. But they found a way. You didn't. You found reasons." The silence after that was thick. Andrew looked down at his hands. Megan opened her mouth, then closed it again. "I'm not angry," I said finally. "I'm clear. I know where I stand now. And I'll remember it." We ended the night politely enough, but there was a coolness in the air that hadn't been there before. As I stood at the window and watched them drive away, I felt something loosen in my chest. Not relief, exactly. Just a quiet acceptance. The test had done its job. And now, I could decide who deserved to be part of the life I was building, a life they knew nothing about. The next morning, I woke to a quiet house and the faint scent of last night's roast chicken lingering in the air. The table was still set with the candles burned down to stubs, their wax hardened in small puddles. I left it that way while I made coffee, letting the scene sit in my mind like a photograph. I replayed the conversation from dinner over and over. The defensive tone, the shifting eyes, the way they seemed almost offended that I'd put their response next to Evelyn's and Ruth's. It wasn't about embarrassing them. It was about making them see the contrast, even if they chose to look away. By noon, I had made up my mind about the next step. The people who had shown up, Evelyn, Ruth, would know the truth. Not all of it, not yet, but enough to understand what their kindness had meant. And those who had failed the test? They would learn nothing. They had already revealed all I needed to know. I started with Evelyn. She was in her garden when I pulled up, her hands buried in a patch of soil that would soon be marigolds. She straightened when she saw me, smiling under the brim of her sun hat. "Mary. Twice in 1 month, I'm honored," she said. "I came to say thank you," I told her. "Not just for the money. For not asking questions. For trusting me enough to give without measuring." She waved a hand. "You don't need to thank me. That's what you do for family." "Not always," I said quietly. "You'd be surprised how many people don't." She gave me a knowing look. I wouldn't be surprised at all. I wanted to tell her everything right there, the lottery, the trust, the reason for my little experiment. But I held back. Timing mattered. Instead, I told her that her help had kept me afloat and that one day soon, I'd make sure she never had to worry about money again. She laughed it off, but I could see the curiosity flicker in her eyes. Next was Ruth. She was shelving books at the library, humming softly to herself, when I walked in. She lit up when she saw me, immediately putting the card aside. "Coffee?" she asked. We walked to the cafe around the corner. Over steaming mugs, I told her the same thing I'd told Evelyn, that her kindness had meant more than she knew. "You've been there for me more times than I can count," Ruth said. "One favor back doesn't tip the scale." "It does," I said. "It tells me who I can count on when there's nothing in it for them." She studied me for a moment, then nodded. "Sounds like some people didn't pass that test." "Not even close," I admitted. "We didn't say names. We didn't need to." Driving home, I felt lighter, even though nothing material had changed. I still had the same secret locked away in Thomas Bell's carefully drafted legal documents. But now, the lines were drawn. I knew who was on my side. That evening, I got a text from Andrew. "Any updates on selling the house?" I stared at it for a long moment, then deleted it without responding. I could already imagine the follow-up: gentle nudges, practical arguments, the illusion that it was for my benefit. But now, I saw it for what it was, a plan to fold me neatly into their lives in a way that made them comfortable. The next day, I called Thomas. "I'm ready to start moving some money," I told him. But quietly. We talked about setting up a small, discreet account for immediate gifts and a larger, structured trust for long-term support. Evelyn would get a monthly stipend disguised as a family legacy distribution. Ruth would get one too. Neither would know the full amount I was capable of giving, only that they'd never have to struggle again. "And the rest of your family?" Thomas asked. "They'll get what they've earned," I said. "Which is nothing." There was no malice in my voice, just certainty. Over the next week, I busied myself with small routines. Gardening in the mornings, reading on the porch in the afternoons, baking bread I didn't really need just because the smell made the house feel warm. I didn't call Andrew. He didn't call me. One evening, while the bread cooled on the counter, I sat down with a notebook and began to sketch out the future. Not the one Andrew and Megan imagined for me, a sleek condo near their suburb, but the one I wanted. A house with a bigger garden. A space where Ruth and Evelyn could visit anytime. Maybe even a small guest house for friends passing through. And beyond that? I thought about what I could build with my winnings that would matter. Something that would outlive me. An organization that gave to people like Evelyn and Ruth, people who gave without expecting, who showed up when no one else did. As I wrote, I realized the test I'd given my family had done more than sort the people in my life. It had given me a blueprint for my purpose. I wasn't just a lottery winner hiding from greedy hands. I was a woman with the means to choose exactly where her generosity went. When the phone rang, I almost didn't answer. But the caller ID said Evelyn, so I picked up. "Mary, I was thinking," she said. "I don't want you to worry about paying me back. Not a cent. I know you said you would, but I won't hear of it. Keep it. Use it. That's final." I smiled into the receiver. "We'll see about that," I said. Because I already knew, she'd get back far more than she'd given me. And she'd never know the half of it. The following Monday, I woke before sunrise. The house was still, the kind of silence you only get before the first bird calls. I poured coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and opened my laptop. It was time to put the next phase of my plan into motion. I started by searching for properties. Not the glossy new builds in Andrew's suburban bubble, but houses with character, places where the walls had stories. I wanted something larger than my current cottage, with room for a sprawling garden and a guest house. Somewhere close enough for Ruth and Evelyn to visit easily, but far enough to feel like my own world. I bookmarked 3 listings and sent them to Thomas Bell, my lawyer, with a note: "Please arrange viewings. All cash offers. Keep it quiet." By mid-morning, Thomas called back. "These are doable. I can have you walking through them by Thursday. You want me to set up an LLC to purchase under?" "Yes," I said. "I don't want my name on public records." "Understood." And the trusts for your friends? Move forward, I told him. Evelyn and Ruth first. As soon as I hung up, I felt a ripple of excitement, not about the houses or the trusts themselves, but about the fact that I was steering my own ship. For years, I'd let other people's needs and opinions set my course. Now, every decision was mine. That afternoon, I baked a batch of shortbread and packaged half for Evelyn, half for Ruth. Delivering them gave me an excuse to see their faces, to keep them close without revealing my hand. At Evelyn's, we sat at her kitchen counter drinking tea. She talked about her marigolds and the stubborn raccoon that had been digging in her compost bin. I'm thinking of getting one of those motion sensor sprinklers, she said. I smiled. Do it. I'll even help you set it up. From there, I drove to the library to find Ruth. She was reshelving a cart of mystery novels. You're spoiling me, she said when I handed her the shortbread. Not possible, I replied. We chatted about a new community program she was organizing, a reading hour for kids whose parents worked late shifts. We're short on volunteers, she admitted. But we'll make it happen. I made a mental note. This, too, could be part of the future I was building. That night, I got a call from Andrew. I debated letting it go to voicemail but answered. Hey, Mom, he said. So, Megan and I have been talking about your situation. My grip on the phone tightened. My situation? Yeah. We just think, maybe it's time you reconsider living alone. That house is a lot for you to manage. We could help you find a smaller place, closer to us. It was the same pitch as before, wrapped in a new bow. I let him talk, offering non-committal sounds until he ran out of words. I appreciate the concern, I said finally. But I'm fine here. There was a pause, then a sigh. All right. We just want what's best for you. I ended the call politely, but inside I felt the door between us close another inch. Tuesday was quiet. I spent the morning in the garden, pulling weeds and planting early lettuce. In the afternoon, I sat down with my notebook to map out the nonprofit I'd been dreaming about, a foundation for people like Evelyn and Ruth, who give without expectation. It would offer grants, cover emergency expenses, and fund community programs. The first 2 beneficiaries would be sitting across from me at my kitchen table within the year, and they wouldn't even know it at first. By Wednesday, Thomas had confirmed the house viewings for Thursday. I told Ruth I'd be busy that day and kept my tone casual. She didn't ask questions. Evelyn didn't either. That was the difference. They didn't need to know everything to stay close. Thursday morning, Thomas picked me up in a black sedan. We toured 3 houses. The first was too modern, all glass and chrome. The second had charm but sat too close to the highway. The third stopped me in my tracks, a 2-story craftsman with a wide porch, a sunroom, and nearly an acre of land. The backyard was shaded by old oak trees, and there was a small guest cottage with its own kitchen and bathroom. This one, I said before we'd even stepped back into the car. Thomas smiled. I'll make the offer today. By the time we drove back into town, my pulse was steady but my mind was racing. I could already see Ruth sitting on that porch with a book, Evelyn tending flowers in the side garden. I could see community dinners, quiet mornings, a life built on the people who had proven themselves. That evening, Megan called. Andrew mentioned you're looking at houses, she said. I froze. Who told you that? Well, he just assumed, since you're so determined to stay put, maybe you're at least looking for something more manageable. I kept my voice even. I'm not looking to downsize. If I move, it'll be because it's right for me. She made a noise that was half laugh, half disbelief. Of course. We just hope you'll keep us in the loop. Big decisions like that affect the family. I'll remember that, I said, knowing full well they'd be the last to know. When I hung up, I sat in the dark for a long time, the house quiet around me. The test was over, the answers clear, but they still thought they had a say in my life. That was about to change. By Friday afternoon, Thomas had called to say the offer on the Craftsman house had been accepted. We could close in 3 weeks. I thanked him, and as soon as we hung up, I sat there at my kitchen table, staring out the window at my tulips swaying in the breeze. 3 weeks. That was all the time I had left in this old cottage before the next chapter began. The thought was both thrilling and bittersweet. I decided not to tell anyone about the move, not even Ruth or Evelyn, until the papers were signed. The surprise would be sweeter if they walked into it with no idea what was coming. That evening, Ruth called to invite me to her place for Saturday supper. "Just us and a pot roast," she said. "Nothing fancy." I smiled into the phone. "I'll bring dessert." Saturday morning, I baked an apple crisp and packed it carefully in the car. The drive to Ruth's was short, and she met me at the door with a hug that smelled of rosemary and fresh bread. Over dinner, she told me about the reading program at the library and how they'd finally gotten enough volunteers to launch it. "I wish we could do more for the older kids," she said. "Some of them go home to empty houses and eat dinner alone." I made a mental note, another gap my future foundation could fill. "We will," I promised, though she didn't know the weight behind my words. Later that night, after I got home, I found a text from Andrew. "We're hosting a barbecue next weekend. You should come. Megan wants to talk to you about some ideas for your place." I almost laughed. Ideas for your place sounded like a design pitch, not a conversation about my life. Still, I decided to go. If nothing else, it would be one more chance to look them in the eye before I moved into a life they wouldn't get to shape. The following Saturday, I drove to their neighborhood, a place of manicured lawns and identical mailboxes. Megan greeted me at the door in a white sundress, perfectly pressed, a glass of wine already in her hand. "You made it," she said brightly. "Come in, Andrew's out back." The yard was staged like a magazine spread, string lights overhead, an outdoor sofa set, the grill already smoking. Andrew was tending to burgers, beer in hand, chatting with a couple I didn't know. "Mom," he said, giving me a one-armed hug. "Glad you're here." For the first hour, I mingled, sipped lemonade, and answered small-talk questions from strangers. Then Megan cornered me near the kitchen island. "So, Andrew said you're resisting the idea of downsizing," she began. "I'm comfortable where I am," I replied. She tilted her head, smiling. "But don't you think it's a bit impractical? That house is old. Lots of upkeep. And it's not exactly near us if you needed something quickly." "It's near what matters to me," I said, my voice even. Her smile faltered for just a second before she recovered. "Well, we're just thinking long-term. Safety, convenience, family." I set my glass down. Family shows up when it matters. That's safety to me. Her eyes flickered, but she didn't answer. The rest of the afternoon was a blur of polite chatter. When I finally left, Andrew walked me to my car. "Mom, we just want to make sure you're okay," he said. "I am," I told him. "Better than you think." The next week, Thomas and I finalized the closing date. I also instructed him to prepare 2 trust agreements, one for Evelyn, one for Ruth, set to begin payouts the month after I moved. They'd be modest enough not to overwhelm them, but steady, dependable, and permanent. "Do you want them to know it's from you?" Thomas asked. "Not at first," I said. "Let them think it's something unexpected but earned. Later, if I choose, I'll tell them." In the evenings, I started sorting through the cottage, donating clothes I no longer wore, boxing up books, deciding what furniture would make the move. I left Daniel's drafting table for last. When I finally stood before it, running my hand over the worn wood, I felt a wave of memory, the nights he'd worked there, the sketches he'd left behind. I decided it would go in the new house, in a place of honor. 2 days before closing, I got another message from Andrew. "Have you thought any more about selling? We could help you list it. Market's hot." I stared at the screen for a moment before typing back, "No need. I've got it handled." No need. Those 2 words felt like the cleanest truth I'd spoken to him in years. Closing day arrived on a cloudless Thursday. Thomas met me at the title office, the paperwork neatly stacked in a manila folder. The signing itself took less than an hour, but when I walked out with the keys to the Craftsman house in my hand, it felt like stepping over a threshold in more ways than one. I didn't go straight there. Instead, I stopped at the cottage. I wanted one last quiet moment before the moving trucks came. The tulips were in full bloom, a sea of red and yellow swaying gently. I walked the yard, touching the weathered fence, the chipped birdbath, the kitchen door Daniel had painted himself. Inside, the boxes I'd packed lined the walls, each one labeled in my careful handwriting. I'd left the curtains open so sunlight poured into the living room, making the dust motes dance. For a moment, I felt the urge to tell Andrew I was moving. Then I reminded myself, this wasn't their business. The next day, the movers arrived just after sunrise. I kept busy directing traffic, books here, dishes there, the drafting table in the front room of the new house. By noon, I was standing on the wide porch of the Craftsman, looking out over nearly an acre of land. The oak trees whispered overhead. The guest cottage sat tucked to the side, its small windows gleaming in the light. I'd already decided that Evelyn and Ruth would each have a key. Not to move in, but to know they had a place if they ever needed it. For the next week, I unpacked slowly, arranging the sunroom with my favorite chairs, stocking the kitchen with the good cast-iron skillet I'd been saving for someday. In the evenings, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea, watching the fireflies flicker in the grass. One afternoon, Evelyn dropped by the cottage to return a book. She called when she found the house empty. "Where are you?" "Oh, out running errands," I said. "I'll swing by your place tomorrow." It felt strange, keeping this from her. But I wanted the reveal to be face-to-face, with her standing in the doorway of the place I'd bought with her in mind. Meanwhile, Andrew's texts continued, questions about whether I'd looked into realtors, offers to connect me with a fantastic downsizing consultant. I answered minimally, never giving more than he asked. The following Wednesday, Thomas called to confirm that the trusts were active. Evelyn and Ruth would receive their first payments within 10 days. "Still anonymous?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "For now." That Friday, I invited Ruth for lunch, telling her I had a little surprise to show her afterward. We ate at Miller's Diner, the same place we'd been meeting for years. She ordered the chicken salad, I had tomato soup, and we talked about everything except money. Afterward, I handed her an envelope. "Don't open it yet. Just hold on to it," I said. She looked puzzled but didn't argue. I drove her to the new house, parking right out front. She stepped out of the car slowly, taking in the porch, the garden beds, the tall oaks swaying above. "Mary," she whispered. "This is beautiful." "It's mine," I told her. "And so is that guest cottage over there, yours anytime you want it." Her eyes filled. "You didn't have to." "I wanted to," I said. "You showed up for me when you didn't have to. That matters." She hugged me hard, and for a long time neither of us spoke. 2 days later, I repeated the process with Evelyn. She arrived at the new house in her gardening clothes, still smelling faintly of soil and lavender. When I told her it was mine, she looked at me with a mixture of shock and delight. "I thought you were staying put," she said. I was. Until I wasn't. I didn't tell either of them about the lottery, not yet. But I made sure they knew they were welcome anytime, that the guest cottage had fresh sheets and a stocked kitchen. I saw the way their shoulders eased when they stepped inside, the way their smiles lingered. That night, as I sat on the porch, I thought about how different their reactions had been from what Andrew and Megan's would be. Gratitude, not calculation. Joy for me, not questions about what they could gain. And I knew, without a doubt, that when the time came for the bigger reveal, it would be on my terms, and in my house, surrounded by the people who had already proven themselves. It didn't take long for Andrew to notice something was different. 2 weeks after I'd moved into the Craftsman, he called out of the blue on a Tuesday evening. His voice was casual, but there was a tautness underneath. "Hey, Mom, just checking in. Haven't heard from you much lately. How's the house?" I smiled to myself. The house is fine. Which house? He asked lightly, but I could hear the fishing in his tone. My house, I said. The same one you think I should sell. There was a pause, then a laugh that didn't quite land. Right. Well, Megan and I were wondering if you wanted to come over for dinner this weekend. We could talk about some things. I knew what some things meant. Still, I agreed. Let them make the move. That Saturday, I drove to their suburb, pulling up to the manicured lawn and spotless driveway. Megan met me at the door with a bright smile, but her eyes were scanning my clothes, my handbag, even my shoes. You look refreshed, she said, leading me inside. We ate grilled salmon at the long dining table, polite chatter filling the space between bites. But as soon as the plates were cleared, Andrew leaned forward. So, he began, Megan and I have noticed you seem comfortable lately. Different. Did something change? I raised an eyebrow. Change? You know, he said, glancing at Megan. Like, financially. Are you sure there's not something you want to tell us? Megan jumped in. We're just concerned, Mary. If you've made a big financial decision, sold the house, gotten some kind of inheritance, you should have guidance. We could help. I let a beat of silence stretch before answering. I haven't sold the house. And I haven't asked for your help. Andrew's jaw tightened. We're family. We're supposed to share things. I set my hands on the table. Family is supposed to show up when it matters. I already tested that theory. Megan's brow furrowed. What do you mean? I mean when I told you I needed $4,000 for an urgent bill and the property taxes, you sent me $500 and a list of suggestions to sell my wedding ring or move in with you. Evelyn and Ruth, who have far less, gave me more than I asked for without hesitation. Megan's mouth opened, but Andrew spoke first. That's not fair. We have responsibilities. So do they, I said evenly. But they acted. You justified. The air in the room thickened. Megan leaned back, crossing her arms. Andrew looked down at his hands. I stood, smoothing my blouse. I'm glad I know where I stand. It makes decisions easier. I left before they could recover enough to press further. The next week, I didn't hear from them, until Friday, when Andrew showed up unannounced at my door. Except this time, it was the door of the craftsman. He stood on the porch, eyes wide as he took in the oak trees, the garden, the fresh paint on the trim. This is your place? Yes, I said, stepping aside. I moved. When? How? He stepped inside, looking around like he was touring a museum. That's not really your concern, I said. Not my concern? He turned to face me, incredulous. Mom, you've clearly come into money. Did you sell the cottage for this? Or what? I asked. He hesitated. Or did you get some kind of payout? Inheritance? I met his gaze steadily. Andrew, the only thing you need to know is that I'm fine. And I'm choosing who to share my life with based on how they've shown up for me. His face hardened. So you're punishing us for not emptying our bank account when you asked for help? No, I said softly. I'm rewarding the ones who stepped forward without me having to beg. He shook his head and laughed bitterly. You've changed. Yes, I said. And it's the best thing that's happened to me in years. He didn't stay long after that. I watched him drive away, his SUV disappearing down the tree-lined road. My pulse was steady. For the first time in a long while, I felt no urge to chase after him, no guilt gnawing at my edges. Inside, I sat at the drafting table, pulled out a notepad, and began outlining the first official event for my foundation, a dinner at the new house, with Ruth and Evelyn as honored guests. They'd have no idea it was also the night I'd tell them everything, the lottery, the trusts, the reason for the test. Andrew and Megan wouldn't be invited. The day of the dinner arrived on a crisp Saturday evening. I'd been planning it for weeks, keeping every detail quiet. The table was set in the sunroom, the windows thrown open to let in the scent of the garden. Candles flickered between small bouquets of daisies and lavender. The roast was in the oven, the apple crisp cooling on the counter. At 6 o'clock sharp, Ruth's car pulled into the driveway, followed minutes later by Evelyn's. I greeted them both at the door, hugging them tight. "You two are my only guests tonight," I said. "Only us?" Ruth asked, glancing around the spacious entryway. "Only you," I said with a smile. "Come in, make yourselves at home." We settled into the sunroom, sipping wine and catching up. They complimented the house, the view, the way the evening light slanted through the windows. I kept the conversation easy until dinner was served. When we'd finished the roast and were lingering over dessert, I set my fork down. My heart was beating harder than I'd expected, but my voice was steady. "There's something I need to tell you both. It's a long story, and I want you to hear it from me." They exchanged a quick glance but said nothing. 2 months ago, I bought a lottery ticket. I didn't think much of it at the time, but that ticket turned out to be worth over $35 million after taxes. Ruth's eyes widened. Evelyn set her fork down slowly. "I didn't tell anyone," I continued. "Not even you. I knew that kind of money could change how people looked at me, how they treated me. So I decided to find out who I could really count on before I shared the truth. I told them everything, the fake story about the library cutting my hours, the urgent $4,000 I claimed to need, the way I'd gone to Andrew first and how he and Megan had responded. I described the text messages, the suggestions to sell my wedding ring, the offers that came with strings. And then I told them what they had done instead." Ruth's hand went to her mouth. Evelyn's eyes glistened. "You showed up," I said simply. "You didn't ask what was in it for you. You didn't suggest I sell something sentimental or move into a place you approved of. You just helped." Evelyn shook her head. "Mary, I had no idea, and I didn't need to. You asked, I gave. That's all." "That's not all," I said. "That's everything." I reached under the table and pulled out 2 envelopes, placing one in front of each of them. "These are the first disbursements from trusts I've set up in your names. You'll get a check every month, enough to cover whatever you need, for the rest of your lives. No conditions. No payback." Ruth looked stunned. "Mary, this is..." "It's because you earned it," I said. "Not with money. With loyalty. With kindness." They both tried to speak at once, but I held up my hand. "There's more. This house isn't just mine. That guest cottage out there? It's yours to use anytime. If you ever need a place to stay, whether for a night or a year, it's yours. No questions asked." Evelyn laughed softly, wiping her eyes. "You planned all this without telling us?" "I wanted it to be a surprise," I said. "And I wanted to do it without the noise. Andrew and Megan, they don't know about any of this. And for now, I want to keep it that way." Ruth leaned across the table and took my hand. "Whatever you decide, we're with you." We spent the rest of the evening talking about possibilities. Evelyn dreamed aloud about fixing her kitchen. Ruth mentioned a trip she'd always wanted to take but never could afford. I listened, making mental notes of the ways I could help without overwhelming them. When they left, I walked them to their cars under the glow of the porch light. "I hope you know," I said, "this isn't charity. It's gratitude." Ruth hugged me tight. "It feels like love." After they drove off, I went back inside, the house still warm from the evening's laughter. I poured myself a cup of tea and sat in the quiet, feeling a peace I hadn't known in years. For the first time since winning the lottery, I'd shared the secret, and it had landed exactly where it belonged. It took less than a week for the first crack to appear. I was on the porch early Thursday morning, coffee in hand, watching sunlight filter through the oak trees, when my phone buzzed. A text from Andrew: "Heard from a neighbor you're not at the cottage anymore. What's going on? I stared at the message for a moment, then typed back, I moved. The 3 dots appeared instantly. Moved where? Why didn't you tell us? I considered leaving it at that, but I knew it would only make the storm hit harder when it came. I found a place that suits me better, I wrote. Closer to what matters to me. No reply came right away, but later that afternoon, Megan called. She didn't bother with small talk. Mary, we just found out you bought a house. A big one. What's going on? Did you sell the cottage? How could you not tell us? Her tone wasn't shock, it was accusation. I didn't sell the cottage, I said evenly. And I didn't tell you because it wasn't your decision. Not our decision, she repeated. We're your family. Big financial moves affect all of us. I almost laughed. Do they? When I told you I needed help, it didn't seem to affect you much. There was a pause before she said, this isn't about that. This is about transparency. It's about boundaries, I replied, and ended the call. The next day, Andrew showed up without warning. He pulled into the drive, climbing out of his SUV like he owned the ground under his feet. This is the house, he asked, looking up at the porch. How did you pay for this? That's my business, I said, holding the door but not inviting him in. Mom, be serious. Houses like this don't just happen. Did you come into money? Sell something? Win something? I kept my face neutral. I'm fine, Andrew. That's all you need to know. His jaw clenched. Why won't you just tell me? Because you already told me who you are when I needed you, I said quietly. This house isn't about you. It never was. He stepped back like I'd slapped him. So that's it? You're cutting us out? I'm keeping the people in who've shown me I can trust them, I said. He shook his head, muttering something under his breath, and got back in the SUV. Gravel crunched as he sped away. That evening, I got a flurry of texts from Megan, each one angrier than the last. We're trying to understand. We deserve to know. Why are you hiding things? Andrew's hurt. He feels betrayed. I didn't answer any of them. Instead, I baked a batch of scones and brought half to Ruth, half to Evelyn. We sat in Evelyn's kitchen that night, laughing about the raccoon finally being scared off by her new motion sensor sprinkler. The conversation was easy, unburdened, nothing like the clipped exchanges with Andrew and Megan. Still, I knew the situation with my son wouldn't just fade away. There would be one more conversation, one more attempt from their side to pull me back into their version of family. It came sooner than I thought. On Sunday, Andrew called again. His voice was quieter this time, almost careful. Mom, can we come over? Just to see the place? I hesitated. Why? Because we're your family, he said. And I think, we've all said things we shouldn't have. Maybe we can start over. I agreed, but only because I wanted to end this on my terms. When they arrived that afternoon, Megan's eyes swept over the porch, the oak trees, the neat garden beds. It's beautiful, she said, but her tone was too smooth to be sincere. Inside, they looked around like appraisers, eyes lingering on the furniture, the art, the polished hardwood floors. So, Andrew said finally, you really did well for yourself. I'm glad. I just wish you'd trusted us enough to tell us how. I met his gaze. Trust has to be earned. Megan crossed her arms. And you think we haven't? I think, I said slowly, that when I asked for help, you had the chance to show me what kind of people you are. And you did. Andrew's face flushed. So this is punishment. No, I said. This is clarity. And it's the reason you'll never have to worry about me asking you for anything again. They didn't stay much longer after that. As I watched them drive away, I felt the last thread of obligation snap quietly inside me. The next time they heard about my money, it would be from someone else, and by then, it would be far too late for them to change the story. A week after Andrew and Megan's visit, the house was quiet again. The air felt lighter without their voices echoing in the walls. I'd been thinking about closure, not the kind that comes with tearful reconciliations, but the kind you choose for yourself. The decision came to me one morning over coffee. I would host one final gathering, not for Andrew and Megan, but for the people who had earned their seats at my table. Ruth. Evelyn. A couple of old friends from the library. No one who had failed my test. I sent out the invitations by hand, each one tucked into a cream-colored envelope with gold edging. Inside, I simply wrote, dinner. My place. Saturday at 6. Dress however makes you happy. When Saturday arrived, the house was filled with the smell of rosemary roast and fresh bread. The candles were lit, the table set with my best china. In the guest cottage, a bouquet of tulips sat on the counter, one for Ruth, one for Evelyn, to take home at the end of the night. They all arrived within minutes of each other, laughter spilling in with the cold evening air. We ate until we couldn't eat more, the conversation easy and warm. When dessert plates were cleared, I stood, resting my hands on the back of my chair. There's something I want you to know, I began. A couple of months ago, I came into a great deal of money. Life-changing money. The room fell silent. I didn't tell anyone at first. I wanted to see who would be there for me if I had nothing to give back. So I made up a story, that I'd lost my income, that I needed $4,000 to keep my home and pay a medical bill. And I watched what happened. I looked at Ruth and Evelyn. You two stepped forward without hesitation. You gave more than I asked for, even though you had less to spare. You didn't ask for details, you didn't keep score. You just showed up. And that's why you're sitting here tonight. Evelyn shook her head slowly. Ruth's eyes glistened. I bought this house with my winnings, I continued, and I've set up trusts in your names. You'll get a monthly check for the rest of your lives. No conditions. No questions. The guest cottage is yours to use whenever you want. This is my thank you, for proving that real generosity still exists. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Evelyn stood and hugged me so tightly I could feel her heartbeat. You didn't have to do this, she said. That's the point, I replied. Neither did you. The rest of the night was a blur of stories, laughter, and the kind of contentment that sits deep in your bones. When the last guest left, I stood alone on the porch, the night air cool against my skin, and felt something I hadn't felt in years, peace. A few days later, I heard through a mutual acquaintance that Andrew and Megan had been speculating about my mysterious new house. Apparently, Megan had suggested I must have found some rich boyfriend. Andrew hadn't corrected her. I didn't bother setting the record straight. Let them think what they want. The truth wasn't theirs to hold. What mattered was that my life now reflected the things I valued, honesty, loyalty, and kindness without strings. I'd built something solid on the foundation of knowing exactly who belonged inside my walls, and who was better left outside. Some people might say I was cold for testing my family that way. But I know better. I know that when you strip away the easy days, the polite dinners, the holiday cards, what you're left with is who people really are when it's inconvenient to help. And I also know that when you find the ones who step up without hesitation, you hold them close and you take care of them for as long as you can. If you're watching this and wondering who in your life would pass that test, think about the last time you asked for help. Who showed up? Who didn't? And what does that tell you about where you put your trust? Drop your own stories in the comments below. Share this with someone who might need the reminder that your worth isn't in what you give, it's in who stays when you have nothing to offer but yourself. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. I've got more stories coming, real ones, about loyalty, betrayal, and the choices that define who we are. Because sometimes, the biggest lottery win isn't money at all, it's finding out exactly who deserves a seat at your table.